For 2 decades, a man operating variously in Atlanta, Georgia and Tampa, Florida, preyed upon gay male prostitutes and men he apparently thought were prostitutes. The attacks are believed to have started in 1968. A hustler would meet a dark-haired, thin, bespectacled John with bushy eyebrows. Sometimes he'd be in an expensive suit. Other times, he'd be casually attired in jeans and a t-shirt. Sometimes he wore a mustache or beard. If he was shaven, he always seemed to have a heavy 5 o'clock shadow. The John paid the prostitute merely to take a drink of vodka, which must have seemed like an unusually easy way to earn a few dollars. Sometimes the well-spoken man told the prostitute that a study was being conducted on the effects of drinking a certain amount of alcohol, and asked him to take part in this research for $50 or $100. Whatever the ruse, the drink was spiked and the prostitute quickly lost consciousness. He awoke to a horror. Often he found himself handcuffed or burned on his genitals or legs. Sometimes the attacker put cigarettes out on the victim, other times flammable liquids. Victims were reluctant to press charges. After all, they were prostitutes and didn't want to draw attention to their profession or homosexuality. Often troubled men on the margins to begin with, they were left to cope with their psychological and physical devastation of these horrendous attacks without even the small compensation of justice being done. The air in the newsroom of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the city's biggest newspaper, was thick with tension. It was the newspaper's tradition to withhold the name of a suspect in a criminal investigation who was neither a fugitive nor officially charged with a crime. Did they dare break with tradition in the case of the Handcuff man? As reporter Richard Greer noted, the name of Robert Lee Bennett Jr. was meaningless to most Atlantans. His right to privacy as great as any other little-known person. What if Bennett was not the Handcuff man? By publishing his name, would the newspaper be invading his privacy? Would it be subjecting an innocent man to an unwarranted public notoriety? Some feared it would compromise the privacy of innocent citizens in the future. Because of this concern, previous stories on the Handcuff man had not only refrained from mentioning his name, but had left out information that might lead readers to identify him. But some in the newsroom argued that public safety was at stake. They pointed out that there were many documents connecting the wealthy local attorney to the Handcuff man's cruel crimes against gay hustlers. Bennett had been arrested for kidnapping an undercover officer posing as a hustler. When his ex-wife sued him for divorce, her lawyer and several men accused him of being the Handcuff man. And, as Greer wrote, state archives contained more than 400 pages of documents providing solid links between Bennett and the sadistic acts of the Handcuff man. Editors at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, however, still were not satisfied that publicly naming him as the suspected torturer was justified. Then his most recent victim picked his photograph out of a group of photos, and a victim years previous also fingered him. That did it. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a story naming Robert Lee Bennett Jr. as the suspected Handcuff man. The next day, Tampa police requested information from their Atlanta counterparts, and they later charged Bennett with an attack on a Florida man who'd been doused in gasoline and lit on fire. The victim had survived, but the injuries were so severe that both of his legs had to be amputated. In retrospect, I have no doubts, Greer later said. Considering the information we had by the time we published Bennett's name, our natural fears should have been allayed. Our prime concern should have been prodding the police to enhance the safety of the young men who were at risk. Robert Lee Bennett Jr. was 22 months old when he was adopted. Prior to the adoption, had the infant been abused, neglected, or traumatized in a way that might have turned him to violent crime? The answer is not known. The childless couple who took him into their home was a successful attorney, Robert Bennett, and his homemaker wife, Annabelle Maxwell Bennett. They'd married in 1933 and set up housekeeping in Towanda, Pennsylvania. In 1943, the elder Robert Bennett was appointed president of Citizen and Northern Bank. Annabelle Bennett volunteered for the Red Cross, and her husband was a tireless fundraiser for the Boy Scouts. The family did a great deal of traveling for pleasure. Bob Bennett Jr. does not appear to fit the profiler of a serial predator. The background of such a vicious criminal is frequently one of severe deprivation, either economic or psychological or both. In many cases, there's a background of physical or sexual abuse, or often emotional abuse by unstable, repressed, neurotic, superstitious, or alcoholic parents. None of this is known to have occurred to Bennett. Both parents appear to have loved him and were close to him. As a little boy, Bobby was a Boy Scout and had a paper route. If the weather was inclement, his father would drive him around in his Fleetwood Cadillac to deliver newspapers, recalled Leon Wieselman, a friend of the family who, as a car dealer, sold them cars. Both parents were very high-class people. Young Bob is remembered as an outgoing teenager, involved in many organizations. Never an athlete, he was not among the most popular boys in school, but neither was he the victim of bullying. He belonged to the Glee Club, was the features editor of the student newspaper, and was a member of the science club. He appears to have had a lifelong love for botany. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that he won second place in a science fair for a project about orchids. For his high school graduation, Bob's father gave him a picturesque $167,000 house located by Lake Wissahickon. Bennett appeared to have grown into a bright and accomplished young man. He graduated from the University of Denver in 1969 and went on to earn a master's degree in political science from the University of Virginia. However, in 1971, while studying there, he was charged with indecent exposure. Records about this case have been expunged. In 1974, Bennett received his law degree from Atlanta's Emory University, took a job with his father's law firm of Davis, Murphy and Bennett in Pennsylvania, and had another run-in with the law. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Bennett allegedly observed a plainclothes Atlanta officer who was working undercover to catch male hustlers on 5th Street near Cypress Street. Although the article does not report how successful the officer was at arresting male prostitutes, he was apparently quite good at imitating them, since Bennett mistook him for one and kidnapped him. The undercover cop was soon rescued, uninjured, by backup police. Kidnapping charges had been dropped by the time Bennett came to trial. His attorney cut an excellent deal by which Bob pleaded no contest to the relatively minor offense of simple battery. The millionaire lawyer got off with a meager $75 fine. In 1976, Bob had another legal difficulty, and one that led him to move away from Towanda. A young New Yorker was traveling in Pennsylvania when, police believe, he met up with Bob Bennett. The attorney paid the man to drink, and the two had sex in Bennett's car. They then headed for the lakeside cottage that had been Bennett's high school graduation gift. For some reason, the man from New York got scared. He grabbed Bennett's keys, jumped in his car, and drove off, but he quickly crashed. The man refused to cooperate with the police. Apparently, like so many of Bennett's victims, he wanted to keep his dealings with Bennett private. Also, according to an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a Towanda police officer claimed that another officer discouraged the alleged victim from pushing an investigation. Lindsay speculated that the officer did this because Robert Bennett Sr. held a seat on the Civil Service Board, which reviews police promotions. Another investigator seconded that opinion. Nobody wanted to press charges against him because of the influence of his father, the investigator said. His father was gold. Guy Knott, an Atlanta lawyer who would eventually handle both divorce and criminal matters for Bob Bennett Jr., recalled a conversation he once had with a saddened Bennett Sr. about his son. "He is my cross to bear," the father said. "My wife loves him dearly, and I love my wife, and that's the only reason I put up with him." The Towanda police were, however, able to persuade Bennett Jr. that it would be best for him if he left the area. He moved to Atlanta. The attorney soon found employment with the Atlanta law firm of Kidd, Pickens, and Tate. When not working at his chosen vocation, he was apparently pursuing his other, crueler interests. One victim, James Crow, later described his frightening encounter with the Handcuff man. Crow was just 19 years old. In the early part of the summer of 1977, he testified in a deposition. "I was on Buford Highway and I was hitchhiking to Atlanta. Friends had told Crow that gay men hung out in Piedmont Park, so that was where the slender, long-haired youth went. At Piedmont Park, he met a slim, tall fellow wearing large glasses. 'Do you drink?' the man asked. Yeah, Crow responded. Want to make some money? How? The man told Crow that all he had to do was drink. The more shots you drink, the man told him, the more money I'll give you. Crow stepped into the tall man's blue Cadillac. The older man gave his new friend some liquor, and Crow was soon feeling tipsy. The man drove the pair to a trailer park and began playing with Crow's penis. Suddenly, Crow sensed something was wrong. He tried to get out of the car, but the other man grabbed him by his long hair and pulled hard. Still, James unlocked the car door and torpedoed out. As he did, he felt a sharp, stinging pain in his right shoulder. He ran, and his attacker ran after him. Crow fell, then got up and started screaming and throwing rocks at his assailant. Crow got away, but did not seek medical attention for his wounds or report the attack to the police. He gave as his reasons that he doesn't like doctors and did not want his sister to know he'd been hustling. A couple of weeks later, Crow was back at Piedmont Park, this time with another, more experienced hustler who was trying to show me some ropes, he said. Crow spotted the man who had plied him with drinks and stabbed his shoulder. He pointed him out to the other hustler, who instantly recognized the thin, dark-haired man. He's got a bad reputation, the hustler told Crow. They call him Handcuff Man. During roughly this time period, Bennett, at age 29, began dating a female secretary, Sandra Powell, who worked at the law firm. She was 5 years older and earned $17,000 per year. At first, the two shared rides home from work, then began dating. Bennett proposed to her in 1978, and Powell accepted. She agreed to marry him, despite his honest admission to her that they would not be husband and wife in the complete sense. Bennett told her that he was impotent. The marriage was one of convenience for both parties. They enjoyed each other's company, and he treated her like a princess, said Bennett's lawyer, Guy Knott. Did Bennett's bride see anything in him besides dollar signs? Maybe. He was an intelligent man, Knott said. He had a very dry sense of humor at times. Shortly after their marriage, Bennett quit the law firm and got a job as a jewelry salesman at Davidson's department store in Columbia Mall. Then, for reasons unknown, he stopped working. He didn't need money. His father had died of heart failure and left his son a great deal of money, including a portfolio of stocks, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Bennett's elegant Towanda mansion. According to Sandra Powell Bennett's testimony at their divorce trial, Bennett did not become much of a house husband. He'd just hang around the house all day, she claimed, and he'd be in his robe when I got home. She said that she worked at her paid job, then went home to do all the cooking and house cleaning. Bennett often suffered from insomnia. The main pleasures in his life appeared to be working in his garden and painting landscapes. The situation was very stressful, she recalled, but she kept it inside and tried not to let it affect the relationship. Despite their troubles, they discussed adopting a child, but never followed through on their plans. During his marriage, Bennett apparently pursued a hobby other than painting and gardening: torture, which his confused, lonely wife knew nothing about. In early 1982, young Cleveland Bob was standing on an Atlanta street corner. Bob was a good-looking guy with a rather wide nose and an oval face. A man in a blue car drove up to Bob. "Would you drink a bottle of vodka with me?" he asked. "I'll give you $100 to do it." Bob got in the car, and the two men drank together. The man wore expensive clothes, but seemed a bit sloppy. He had a gold chain around his neck, and the first 3 buttons of his shirt were open. The pair also went to a bar called the Texas Drilling Company and downed a few. The next thing Bob remembers is waking up in the parking lot. He wore only his parachute pants and had 2 cigarette burns, one on his belly and the other on an arm. Later, Bob would say that he wanted to take a bottle and break it over the attacker's head. In September 1982, something happened that shocked Sandra Powell Bennett to the core and led her to leave her husband. Bob Bennett Jr. was arrested for murder and armed robbery. His wife was walking home from a bus stop when she saw her handcuffed husband being led away from their home by uniformed police officers. "What is it? What have you done?" she gasped. "I don't know," he replied, apparently as baffled as she was. "They won't tell me anything." Bennett was charged with the murder of 24-year-old James Lee Johnson, a dishwasher who'd been shot. His body was found with his wallet missing. Although the charges were dropped 2 months later because of insufficient evidence, Sandra Bennett did not return to her husband. He contested her suit for divorce. According to Knott, his lawyer, he knew she was going to get out of the marriage, but he simply contested it because of the money, because she wanted a fortune. 3 gay male prostitutes testified at the divorce trial that they believed Bennett to be the notorious Handcuff man. Sandra Bennett was granted a divorce and awarded $40,000 as a divorce settlement. In addition, Bennett was ordered to pay $12,000 in lawyer fees. In the years following his divorce, Bob Bennett divided his time between Towanda and Florida, where he stayed with his disabled mother in winter and spring. Annabelle Bennett had been in a bad car accident while vacationing in Kenya and had been left paralyzed as a result. Her major comfort was the devoted son who doted on her as she had doted on him when he was growing up. While he spent much time comforting his mother and keeping her company, Bennett could be verbally abusive to both his father and his mother, Knott remembered. An acquaintance of the Bennetts recalled that Bob Bennett made comments sometimes that she could irritate him to the point he wanted to scream. "We said, 'Bob, you probably do a lot of things to make her scream.'" In 1983, Bennett was banned from the Gallus, an Atlanta bar and restaurant with a predominantly gay clientele. The ban came about when the gay male prostitute complained to Sergeant J.D. Kirkland that Bennett was known to pick hustlers up and injure them. On November 4, 1983, Bennett signed a document saying he understood he'd been barred from the premises of the Gallus restaurant and that he could be arrested without further notice and charged with criminal trespass if he returned to it. In 1984, a young man named Myers von Hirschsprung was standing on a street corner near his home waiting for a bus to take him downtown. A car approached him. "Need a ride?" the driver asked. The youth did. He got in the car and exchanged introductions and pleasantries with a middle-aged man behind the wheel. "I'm a professor at Georgia Tech," the driver told von Hirschsprung. As Myers recalled, the man's speech had a rather slow cadence to it. "I'm doing a study about people's drinking and their tolerance levels for it. I'll pay you $100 to drink whatever kind of liquor you want to, Myers, if you can drink it as quickly as you can. We'll go somewhere and you'll drink and then walk, and if you're walking okay, you'll drink some more." Von Hirschsprung was instantly suspicious. They were near his destination, and the young man decided he did not want to earn $100 that way. "Please just let me out," he told the supposed professor. The man did, and Myers escaped. In 1985, a gay male prostitute who used the name Chico was picked up in Atlanta by a dark-haired, bespectacled white man. As he was driving, the customer showed Chico a pair of handcuffs. "Try them on," he urged. "I just want to see how they look on you." Chico was instantly wary. "Please stop the car," he said. "No," was the reply. Chico saw that the door lock had been removed and the handle was covered with duct tape. The window was open, however, and the terrified and small Chico dove out of it as the vehicle was moving. He was badly bruised and scratched from his fall, but escaped without other injuries. Others were not so fortunate. Max Schrader was a handsome, slim, and streetwise Atlanta youth who sported small black tattoos on both forearms. One sunny day in April 1985, he was hanging around the streets of Ponce de Leon and Barnett, and, in his own words, was looking for some money when he spotted a potential source. A man in a car kept driving around the block. The man parked at a curb and motioned for Schrader to approach. "Get a hard-on for me," the driver said. "I'll drive around the block and come back." True to his word, he took off and circled back to the same place. "Would you like a drink of vodka?" he asked Schrader. "Yeah," the hustler replied. The John handed him a brown drink. "I mixed some Coke in it," the customer explained. Schrader began drinking. Almost immediately he felt woozy, then crumpled to the ground. He knew the drink had been laced with something. Semi-conscious, he was pulled into the passenger seat of the man's car. "Don't hurt me," he begged. But the vehicle took off. The stranger drove Schrader to a wooded area and began taking Schrader's clothes off. He poured a cold liquid over the drowsy young man's genitals. Then he set Max Schrader's genitals on fire. The helpless man lay on the ground, shrieking for help as his attackers sped away. Someone heard Schrader's cries and called the police. Schrader spent 2 months in the hospital, in pain and often heavily sedated. He could not walk much during his hospital stay and had to wear a diaper-like gauze over his genital area. But the handcuffed man was not satisfied. On June 10, 1986, 2 Atlanta pals, Michael Johnson and Anthony Tony Papiglia, were hanging out on Ponce de Leon between the Goofy Gopher and the Pegasus. Papiglia was wearing a bright blue fishnet tank top, blue jeans, cowboy boots, and a black hat. A man called to Papiglia from a car, and Papiglia approached him. The driver introduced himself as Jim and asked if Papiglia wanted to earn $50 by participating in an Emory University study on the effects of given amounts of alcohol. Papiglia told Jim to wait a minute. Then Papiglia ran back to his friend Michael. The two friends usually give each other the license plate and description of the guys who picked them up, and Papiglia did so this time. When Papiglia explained that he was going to drink some alcohol for this researcher, then walk a straight line, Michael said, "You can do that if you want to, but remember, you've got to be at work tomorrow at 7. He also warned his friend to be careful because there was a weirdo around attacking guys. Jim drove Papiglia around for a while, serving him vodka. Eventually, Jim stopped his car behind the Texas Drilling Company bar. "Would you like to put on a pair of shorts so you'll be more comfortable?" Jim asked, holding a pair of cut-off jeans. Papiglia agreed. Underneath the emergency stairs of the bar, Papiglia peeled off his pants and put on the shorts. They had no pockets, so he had to leave his wallet and other personal items in his own pants. The two men went into the bar and downed a few drinks. Papiglia's memory of the night is fuzzy after that. He recalled that, when they left the bar, Jim seemed to want to get away from him, but Papiglia followed him to the car because he needed his pants and wallet. Papiglia was able to get into the passenger seat, but Jim took off and pushed Papiglia out of the vehicle while it was moving. Papiglia called to a man carrying a garbage can nearby, and the man approached. "I just got mugged," Tony explained before losing consciousness. He was wearing only his undershorts, and he'd suffered several abrasions and bruises. He was later unable to recall removing his shirt or the shorts he'd been loaned. When he came to, 3 men were crowded around him. "Where are you living?" one of the men asked. Papiglia gave him his address and directions before passing out. When he awoke, he was at a Dunkin' Donuts with 2 Atlanta police officers. "Could you identify the man who called himself Jim?" one asked. "Yes," Papiglia replied. He didn't have to wait long. Jim was standing in the parking lot of the donut shop. 2 men who'd been alerted to the crime had blocked his car with their own vehicles. One of those was Papiglia's friend Charles Fallow, who had also been mugged by Jim. About 9 months earlier, Fallow said the 2 of them had been drinking together, and the man had handcuffed Fallow, then beaten and robbed him. Gary Clapp was unemployed in February 1991. Trained as a carpenter, engaged to be married, and the father of a 3-year-old daughter, Clapp left his home in Massachusetts for Florida on a quest for work. Needing a free meal one night, Clapp awaited outside a Salvation Army office in Tampa, not knowing that the area was frequented by male prostitutes and their predators. As he waited, a man drove up in a white Lincoln Town car and beckoned to Clapp. The thin, dark-haired driver wore a Fu Manchu-style mustache and large gold-rimmed glasses. He offered Clapp $50 to drink vodka as part of an experiment. He was well-spoken, Clapp recalled. He seemed like he was on the up and up. I asked him his name, but he wouldn't tell me. Clapp got into the car and settled against the brown leather of the passenger seat. The unemployed man accepted several shots of vodka from a plastic cup as the 2 men conversed and shared cigarettes. The man had a notebook and pen with him. He jotted down notes as Clapp guzzled drinks. "You need to drink faster," the researcher told Gary. Gary Clapp began losing consciousness. He said that he may have visited a bar with the stranger, but was not certain. He did not recall the horrendous events that transpired immediately afterward. A police officer driving on Tampa's Courtney Campbell Causeway spotted what looked like an out-of-control bonfire in a nearby field. He stopped to investigate. It was the burning body of Gary Clapp. Nelson Garcia III was one of the firefighters on the scene. He later testified, "I was surprised he lived. We really didn't think he was going to make it." Clapp did pull through, although both his legs had to be amputated above the knee. His fiancée broke off their engagement. Sitting in a wheelchair in a state-run boarding home, a despairing Clapp said, "Things fell apart when this happened. I don't know why the guy didn't just finish me off. This is not going to be easy." When the cops eventually brought a series of photographs and spread them before Clapp, he instantly recognized his attacker. Clapp said, "It took me a minute to say something. I couldn't believe they got him so quickly, and seeing his face again, I went into shock." But police did not catch Bennett then, as he often returned to Atlanta. In May 1991, a young man named Michael Jordan Jr. was found severely burned. Jordan was handsome and slightly built, with wavy dark brown hair. He sported a small beard and mustache. He was walking down an Atlanta street when he saw a man in a white Lincoln motioning to him. Michael noticed that the tag on the man's car said Pinellas County, Florida. Being from Florida himself and wanting to make conversation, Jordan said to the stranger, "How are you doing, Clearwater?" "No, I'm from St. Pete," the smiling driver replied. "Do you want to make $50? "Well, what do I got to do to make $50? Jordan asked. "All you got to do is drink," the man told him. "I got 3 pints, and if you drink it all, I'll give you $50. "Drink, that's it?" "Sure." "First, walk around the corner to 5th Street and Juniper. Then take your shirt off," the driver instructed. Jordan headed for 5th and Juniper, but didn't remove his shirt when he got there. The Lincoln tailed him, then went to a nearby parking lot. Again, the stranger motioned for Jordan, who went to the parking lot and got in the car with the older man. Michael took his shirt off, and the driver gave him a drink. "You got a problem here," Jordan jovially informed him. "I come from a long line of alcoholics, and I'm going to be able to drink this with no problem." "If you get a bit drunk, don't worry," the man assured him. "I'll rent you a room and you'll be all right." Then he asked Jordan to take his penis out and try to get it hard. Jordan complied with that request as well. The stranger told Jordan he was going to go to the store for Coca-Cola to mix in the drinks. He handed the youth a $20 bill, and Jordan stuck it in his moccasins, then sat down in the parking lot and waited for the man to return. He did, and gave Jordan another drink. That was all Jordan could remember before waking up in the hospital in agony because of terrible burns over his genitals, buttocks, and legs. He'd been naked and unconscious when his assailant dropped him behind an Atlanta hotel. For a while, the badly injured man could not be interviewed by authorities because he was either in excruciating agony or heavily medicated. He also had special fears because of where he'd been burned. "If I get an erection," Jordan said, "it bleeds, and they don't know if I'm going to be normal again there." May 1991 was apparently a busy month for Bennett. A young man named Matthew Red Vernon told police that on the weekend of May 17th, he was picked up by a white male driving a Lincoln Continental. The man gave him $20 for every pint of vodka he could drink. As they drove around, Vernon realized who had picked him up. "I'll drink the next half pint if you give me the $20 now," he told the man. Bennett gave him the money. With the $20 securely in his palm, Vernon opened the door and jumped out of the car, telling the driver, "I know you. You're Handcuff Man." Once on the sidewalk, Vernon stuck his finger down his throat and vomited up the vodka. In the meantime, Jordan had recovered just enough for a productive interview with police investigators. He could not remember how he'd been assaulted, but he did recall Bennett being the last person he'd been with before losing consciousness. He had no trouble picking his picture out of a group of photographs the police showed him. Then Max Schrader picked out Bennett's picture as that of the man who had offered him money to drink 5 years before. "The reason I didn't forget it," the wounded man said, "is that I thought about it every day." It was after the second identification that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution made the difficult decision to name Bennett as the suspect in the vicious Handcuff Man assaults. After he was publicly fingered, Bennett issued vociferous denials. "I'm not the Handcuff Man," he emphatically told reporters. He alleged that an Atlanta detective led hustlers to identify him. "I think that the detective wants desperately to put this Handcuff Man behind bars," Bennett said, "and he thinks I'm that person. It doesn't happen to be true." Guy Knott, Bennett's attorney in the Atlanta cases, called it a case of mistaken identity. Free on $300,000 bail, Bennett resided, as he had in the past, with his disabled mother, Annabelle Bennett. In September 1991, Knott suggested an alternative culprit in the Florida attack on unemployed carpenter Gary Clapp. Witchcraft is definitely involved in this, Knott said. The lawyer went on to say that close to Clapp's burning body there'd been decapitated chickens and decapitated goats, which smacks of the cult Santeria. Santeria is an Afro-Cuban religion that combines elements of Roman Catholicism with aspects of the West African religion of the Yoruba. This religion, which has many adherents in Florida, is controversial because animal sacrifice is one of its rituals. In the Atlanta cases, Knott requested a change of venue because he claimed that the tenor and intensity of publicity surrounding this case had severely prejudiced potential jurors. Fulton County Prosecutor D. Downs opposed the motion. In June 1991, a tense and haggard-looking Bennett appeared in an Atlanta courtroom to waive extradition to Florida. He also complained bitterly about his conditions of incarceration. He said he was given no breakfast and had to go 5 hours without a blanket, pillow, or cigarettes. He said other prisoners were threatening him. One said he'd cut me, Bennett claimed. Speaking on his client's behalf, Knott requested that Bennett be separated from his fellow prisoners. "We're not asking for special favors," Knott claimed. "We just want to ensure his safety. He's under a tremendous amount of pressure at the jail. He's under constant harassment." When Gary Clapp learned that his attacker was on his way to trial in Florida, he was living in a tiny government-subsidized apartment. His trousers pinned up around his thighs, holding and petting a black cat purring in his lap, he gave an interview to a reporter from the St. Petersburg Times. The legless man was using a wheelchair to get around and talking about the possibility of someday being fitted with prosthetic legs. He fantasized about what he wished would happen to Bennett. "Truthfully, I'd like to see the same thing happen to him that happened to me." He also said that he wanted to be in the court when Bennett was tried, though he knew it would be emotionally wrenching to have to face the man who burned off his legs. "It can't be any harder than it's already been," Clapp said. Before trial in Tampa, Clapp gave a deposition at the district attorney's office. Also present were Bennett, his lawyer Knott, the prosecutor, and a court reporter. One of Clapp's leg stumps began to bleed. Knott asked if he was okay and if he wanted to delay the deposition. The solicitousness made Bennett angry. Knott recalled Bennett as the coldest, most remorseless client I ever worked with. Bennett had at first been determined to fight the charges. He spent $500,000 preparing his defense, but lost his nerve at the last minute. He knew there would be a parade of men to testify that he'd committed similar outrages against them. He also knew that the Tampa Fire Department had a videotape of Clapp burning. It all added up to enough evidence to get him a life sentence. As his attorney Guy Knott commented, "In Florida, life means life. We just could not take the chance." Prosecutors in both Tampa and Atlanta negotiated with Bennett's lawyers for a deal. They hammered out an agreement whereby Bennett would plead guilty to the attempted murder of Gary Clapp and 2 counts of aggravated assault in Atlanta, and could serve a 17-year sentence in Florida to run concurrently, rather than consecutively, with his sentence for the Atlanta crimes. The result of the deal, as Georgia's Fulton County District Attorney Louis Slayton acknowledged, would be that he would serve no additional time for the Atlanta crimes. Many gay activists were outraged by what they considered a lenient deal for a man who had terrorized their community for decades. Good citizens needed to step forward, urged Larry Pellegrini, president of the Lesbian and Gay Rights Chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. "This is horrendous." Lynn Cothran, the co-chair of Queer Nation, said, "It's a sad situation when people can get away with torture, intimidation, and hate. There's obviously a problem with the system." The Atlanta president of Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, Judy Colbs, remarked, "Setting people on fire is setting people on fire, and it should not matter what the sexual orientation is. It goes back to prejudice. It affects and invades all parts of society." Jeff Graham, a member of ACT UP, an AIDS activist organization, also decried the plea bargain. "I think clearly, if it were a case of involving heterosexuals, that if he had done this to a woman or a straight man, that his sentence would be much greater than what it is, Graham speculated. It's taken the Atlanta Police Department dozens of years to seriously investigate and solve this case. I think that clearly you've got a prejudiced judicial system in Atlanta, in Fulton County. I'm happy Tampa was able to put together the case. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution also denounced the plea agreement in an editorial entitled Reject Handcuff Case Deal. The outrage of those quoted previously was shared by at least one of Bennett's victims. Max Schrader, who was burned by Bennett in 1985, said that prosecutors never contacted him to discuss the proposed plea bargain. The judge has got to decide if the time fits the crime, Schrader observed. I'm going to be there to tell him it does not. Despite objections, the deal went through. On February 24, 1992, Bennett appeared in an Atlanta courtroom and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated assault. The sentence was 17 years in prison to run concurrently with the 17-year sentence that he was to serve in Florida for the attempted murder of Gary Clapp. The 44-year-old lawyer was also ordered to pay $65,000 in restitution for the medical bills of the 2 Atlanta victims, was banned for life from ever being in Fulton County, and was ordered to see a psychiatrist. Fulton Superior Court Judge Isaac Jenrette asked the defendant, "Did you pick up these 2 fellows?" Bennett paused, then talked to his attorney. "Did you pick up these 2 fellows?" Jenrette repeated. "I'm pleading guilty to the 2 charges," was Bennett's answer. At the time of the sentencing, Bennett was free on a $300,000 bond, under the condition that he was not to leave the home he shared with his mother, except on approved business, such as seeing his lawyers. He was to report on March 9, 1992, to begin serving his sentence. But Bennett broke his agreement. He was spotted cruising the same Tampa street where he had picked up Gary Clapp. Tampa detective Bob Holland testified that he saw Bennett's car and followed it only to see the convicted torturer talking with some guy leaning in his car window. What was weird was it was about the same time of day that he met Gary Clapp there. It was almost a year to the date. Because of this offense, Bennett was sent to jail 2 weeks earlier than scheduled. The notorious handcuffed man was initially put into solitary confinement, partly because he feared other prisoners. Tom Patterson, a supervisor at the North Florida Reception Center where Bennett was initially kept, described him as an average inmate and said he hadn't caused any problems. Bennett was later moved to Liberty Correctional Institution, a close custody institution in West Florida. What was behind the crimes of Robert Lee Bennett Jr.? Because he was frequently described as a gay basher, his attacks were assumed to be the result of a homophobic hatred for his own preferences directed outward. For several years, Bennett denied that he was gay. However, he eventually admitted to being gay, Knott said. Was he, as most people naturally suppose, a homophobic homosexual? Knott was not able to say with certainty. He never expressed any homophobic sentiments to me, the attorney related. But the gay basher label is incomplete. As far as is known, Bennett never sought out homosexuals per se, but many thought were selling gay sexual services. Similar crimes occur in the heterosexual community. Ted Bundy murdered young women. Joel Rifkin murdered female prostitutes. Of course, there are strategic reasons why someone bent on robbery, rape, or other violence might target prostitutes of either sex. They're easy prey, being approachable and accustomed to odd requests. Being paid to drink does not set off an alarm in someone who may, as one hustler recalled, have been paid to urinate in a jar by a fetishist. Since prostitution is illegal, its perpetrators are less likely to report crimes against themselves to the authorities. All of these may have been factors in the handcuffed man's choice of targets. One of the victims, Michael Jordan, commented, "I feel sorry for this guy. I don't feel sorry for him in some ways, but I feel sorry for him because I don't understand why he would do something like this. It's got to be something that's hurting him inside so bad or something." Bennett was not insane. The office of his attorney, Guy Knott, had a team of psychiatrists in Florida examine him. He was completely sane, Knott recalled. He knew right from wrong. But he had a behavioral disorder. That's an understatement. He's known to have suffered from chronic impotence, which may have been a factor in his burning the genitals of male prostitutes. If you can do something I want to do and can't, Knott speculated, I might want to destroy your ability to do it. While the handcuff man's sexual dysfunction may explain his choice of victims, it does not explain his barbaric cruelty. After all, there are millions of men who suffer from impotence, and very few of them become violent. Could sexual sadism have been behind his crimes? There's no evidence that Bennett reached an orgasm while he was torturing his victims. Still, it can't be ruled out, since his victims were usually unconscious. Is it possible that, like a minority of other sex offenders who were described as generally impotent in non-violent situations, Bennett could only get erections or climaxes through criminal acts? A contempt for those who sell sexual services is common in our culture. After all, prostitution is a criminal offense and is a common term of derision. That feeling might have become an exaggerated and obsessive fixation for Bennett. He's not known to have expressed remorse for his crimes or any concern for the damage done to his victims. Gary Clapp, who saw Bennett in the Tampa courtroom during his plea, said, "I don't think he'll ever feel sorry for anything he's done. This guy is a sick puppy." Knott described Bennett as very cold and clinical. He never would, in so many words, admit doing these things, although he pled guilty. Once, during his imprisonment in 1997, Bennett got a disciplinary write-up for disorderly conduct. Other than that, he appears to have been inoffensive as a prisoner. He did, however, break with Knott. Bennett attempted to bring ineffective assistance of counsel claims against the lawyer because, according to Knott, he believed that we told him he would get out in 2 or 3 years. No attorney would take Bennett's case, but he did find a lawyer who filed a suit against Knott to get Bennett's fee back. That lawsuit was still pending when Bennett died of a stroke on April Fool's Day, 1998. He took the reasons for his hatred of male prostitutes and the genesis of his extraordinary cruelty with him to his grave.